A New Hope. The acrid stench of scorched metal and burning flesh assaulted Private Jack Reese's nostrils as he huddled behind the ruined hulk of an armored personnel carrier. Energy bolts sizzled overhead, filling the air with an angry buzzing sound, like a swarm of enraged hornets. Jax clutched his plasma rifle tightly against his chest, heart pounding beneath his gray body armor. It was supposed to be a routine patrol on the frontier colony of Zephyrus, but that plan had gone to hell the moment the Krogan warband ambushed Jax's platoon. The insectoid aliens had burst from underground tunnels in a chittering tide of serrated claws and snapping mandibles. Caught in the open, the humans had been forced to fall back to a shallow ravine for cover, but it was only a temporary reprieve. Echo 7. This is Saber 1. We are pinned down and taking heavy casualties. Over. Lieutenant Singh shouted into his comm unit over the din of battle, requesting immediate reinforcements and air support. A burst of static. Negative, Saber 1, came the garbled reply. No assets available at this time. Maintain position and await further. The transmission cut off abruptly as a plasma mortar detonated nearby, showering the human survivors with clods of dirt and twisted shrapnel. Singh cursed and ripped off his damaged headset, tossing it aside. He turned to face his battered troops, his expression grim. Listen up. No cavalry's coming. It's up to us to hold the line. We let those bugs break through. The colony is good as gone. So dig in, conserve ammo, and make every shot count. We show these uglies what humans are made of. Aura. A ragged cheer went up from the assembled soldiers, Jax included, but deep down, he couldn't shake the icy tendrils of fear coiling in his gut. Scarcely 2 months out of boot camp, he had never faced an enemy like this before. Jax had always dreamed of being the hero, of doing his part to protect the innocent and safeguard humanity's expanding stellar empire. Now that he was staring down the barrel of an overwhelming foe, however, grandiose fantasies of glory and valor seemed very far away indeed. The ground trembled as the Krogan horde pressed their attack, unleashing a fresh barrage of plasma fire and hammer-sized flechettes. Soldiers cried out as the deadly projectiles found their marks, their voices abruptly silenced. Jax saw Corporal Vasquez, his fire team leader, frantically applying a tourniquet to what remained of her shredded left leg. Private Okoro slumped back against a boulder, a charred hole in his chest still smoking. One by one, Jax's comrades fell, and it was all he could do to keep firing his rifle at the onrushing tide of chitin and claws with shaking hands. There's too many, Singh roared, emptying his sidearm into a Krogan warrior that had crested the barricade, sending it tumbling back in a spray of yellow ichor. Fall back to the... The rest of his words were lost as a cacophonous roar suddenly filled the sky, drowning out even the hellish sounds of battle. Jax's head snapped up in disbelief as a formation of blocky aircraft thundered out of the clouds above, thrusters burning white-hot. Reinforcements, he scarcely dared to hope. But as he watched, amazed, the spacecraft banked sharply and hurtled straight towards the seething mass of aliens below. Missile pods and chin-mounted autocannons erupted, stitching lines of fiery destruction through the Krogan ranks, and from the transport's gleaming flanks erupted drop pods. The hammered steel cylinders fell like meteors, wreathed in flames and trailing thick plumes of smoke. The Krogan barely had time to react before the pods smashed down among them, crushing scores of the insectoid soldiers in explosions of earth and gore. Even before the dust had settled, armored hatches blew open and outstormed the most heavily armed and lethally equipped warriors Jax had ever seen. The soldiers were clad head to toe in jet-black armor, bristling with all manner of weapons that made Jax's rifle look like a child's toy. They moved with inhuman speed and purpose, leaping and bounding through the Krogan lines, their impossibly powerful firearms scything down aliens like wheat before a thresher. Within seconds, the Krogan assault was crumbling, their disciplined advance degenerating into a chaotic rout as the black-armored juggernauts tore into their midst. Jax could only gape in awe as one of the troopers launched himself into a spinning leap, twin monomolecular blades extending from his gauntlets. The human landed in a whirlwind of flashing steel, his victims' sundered corpses falling in pieces around him. Another soldier shouldered a massive directed energy weapon and unleashed a searing lance of plasma into a knot of Krogan warriors, vaporizing a dozen of the creatures in a single stroke. It was like watching a scene out of a holo movie, or perhaps one of the ancient mythologies Jax had always been so fascinated by as a child. Part of his mind whispered that this was all a dream, that he would wake up any moment now in his bunk back at base camp. But the tang of ozone and the concussive thump of detonations were all too real. And as the ruthless efficiency and sheer ferocity of the mysterious soldier's assault tipped the scales firmly in the human's favor, Jax realized he was bearing witness to a legend in the making, a new chapter in the ongoing saga of humanity's ascent to the stars. It was a truth driven home with stark finality as the last of the Krogan finally broke and fled, leaving their dead and dying carpeting the blood-slick earth. The soldiers, Jax could see now that their armor bore the same winged dagger insignia, took up a defensive perimeter around the pitifully few survivors of Saber Platoon. Only then, as his adrenal high began to fade and the magnitude of what he had just experienced sank in, did Jax hear one of the soldiers utter the fateful words that would change the course of his life forever. "Hot drop special forces reporting for duty, sir. We'll take it from here." Angels from the sky. As the echoes of the ferocious battle faded into eerie silence, Private Jax Reese struggled to process the stunning turn of events that had just unfolded. Mere moments ago, he and his platoon had been on the verge of annihilation at the claws of the Krogan horde. Now, as the smoke began to clear, Jax found himself staring at the intimidating figures of the soldiers who had snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. The hot drop troopers moved through the carnage with a predatory grace, their implanted armor still smoldering from the heat of atmospheric re-entry. Jax watched, mesmerized, as they went about securing the perimeter with ruthless efficiency, checking for survivors both human and Krogan. There was a cold, mechanical precision to their movements that sent a shiver down Jax's spine, an unsettling contrast to the feral brutality with which they had dispatched the enemy. What just happened? Private Lee, Jax's shell-shocked bunkmate and closest friend, asked in a hoarse whisper as he stumbled to Jax's side. "Who are these guys?" "I don't know," Jax replied, unable to tear his gaze away from the enigmatic warriors. "But they saved our asses, that's for sure." One of the hot drop soldiers, a towering figure with a crimson stripe adorning his matte black pauldron, strode purposefully towards Lieutenant Singh, mag-locking his still-smoking plasma cannon to his back with a metallic click. As he removed his full-faced helmet to reveal a grizzled, scar-seamed visage, Jax glimpsed the glint of cybernetic augmetics where the man's eyes should have been. "Captain Gideon Hawkins, 181st Hot Drop Regiment," the soldier said, his voice a guttural rumble. He gave Singh a perfunctory nod. "Apologies for the late arrival. Had to punch through some rather spirited resistance in orbit." "Lieutenant Samir Singh, 75th Colonial Infantry," Singh replied, snapping to attention and rendering a crisp salute. "And let me assure you, Captain, your timing was impeccable. I thought we were goners for sure." Hawkins' artificially blue gaze swept over the battered remnants of Saber Platoon, as if assessing their capabilities and finding them wanting. "Your men held out longer than most would have," he allowed. "Takes guts, standing your ground in the face of that." He gestured dismissively at the piled Krogan corpses, the augmetic digits of his left hand clicking and whirring. Brass thought the Zephyros colony was a soft target. Figured a few bombs from on high would put these bugs back in their place. Guess the Krogan didn't get the memo. Singh shook his head, his expression grim. "They tunneled right under our perimeter, came boiling out of the ground like something straight out of a nightmare. Never seen anything like it." If you and your boys hadn't shown up when you did. Hawkins grunted. All in a day's work. That's what we hot drops are for. Sending us in when the odds are impossible and the cost of failure is too high. He turned to survey the wreckage-strewn battlefield. All right, people, let's clean up this mess. Salvage what gear you can, then rig the Krogan bodies for incineration. Last thing we need is these bastards hatching more of their kind from the corpses. As the hot drop soldiers moved to follow their captain's orders with seamless coordination, Jax couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. Steeling his nerves, he approached Hawkins, fighting the urge to wither beneath the weight of the officer's piercing stare. Sir, if I may ask, Jax began, struggling to keep his voice steady. What exactly is a hot drop? I've never heard of your unit before. Somewhat to Jax's surprise, the barest flicker of a smile tugged at the corner of Hawkins' mouth, a brief flash of amusement softening his chiseled features. I'd be shocked if you had, son, the captain said. We're not exactly poster boys for the recruiters. To put it simply, we're the Terran Republic's Rapid Response Force, the meanest subs in the galaxy. When the enemy digs in deep and the Navy can't blast them out from orbit, they drop us right into the thick of it to apply the personal touch. He rapped an armored knuckle against his chest plate for emphasis. These Takarma rigs we wear aren't just for show. They let us survive re-entry and hit the ground shooting, to bring the pain right to the bad guy's doorstep. Back in the early days, they called it hot dropping, and the name stuck. Jax felt a thrill of excitement blaze through him at the captain's words. He had always dreamed of being part of something greater, of striking fear into the hearts of humanity's myriad foes. And now, seeing the hot drop warriors in action, their aura of coiled lethality and indomitable will, Jax knew he had found his calling. It's extraordinary, sir, Jax said, awe coloring his every word. The way you fight, the tech you use. I've never seen anything like it. You're like angels, descending from on high to deliver righteous vengeance. Hawkins barked a short laugh at that, the harsh sound incongruous coming from his battle-hardened frame. I like you, Private. Reese, sir. Jax Reese. Private Reese, the captain finished, his cybernetic gaze boring into Jax with an intensity that was almost physically palpable. Keep that sense of wonder, that fire in your gut. Emperor knows we could use more soldiers like you in the hot drops. He clapped a hand on Jax's shoulder, the servos in his armor whining with emotion. Tell you what, when we get back to HQ, I'll put in a good word with the selection board. The 181st could use some new blood, and you look like you've got the right stuff. What do you say? Jax's heart leaped into his throat at the captain's words, scarcely daring to believe what he had just heard. A chance to join the most elite fighting force in human space, to become one of the legendary angels of death that the Krogan and humanity's other foes had learned to fear. It was an opportunity beyond his wildest dreams. I would be honored, sir, Jax stammered, molding his features into an expression of grim determination. I won't let you down, Captain. I swear it on my life. Hawkins nodded, a glimmer of approval in his artificial eyes. I'll hold you to that, Reese, he rumbled. Welcome to the first day of your new life. Welcome to the hot drops. The best of the best. 2 weeks after the fateful battle on Sapphirus, Private Jax Reese found himself standing ramrod straight in a pristine briefing room deep within the bowels of the Terran Republic's premier military training facility on Titan. Gone was the grime and sweat of the front lines, replaced by the sterile gleam of polished metal and the hum of recycled air. Yet Jax could not shake the feeling that he was about to embark on the most challenging and dangerous mission of his life. Assembled before him was a motley assortment of men and women, 30 in all, each one handpicked by their commanding officers as candidates for the grueling hot drop selection process. They came from all corners of human space and all walks of life, grizzled veterans and fresh-faced recruits, career soldiers and idealistic volunteers. Yet they all shared the same fire in their eyes, the same unquenchable thirst to push themselves to the very limits of human endurance and emerge as something more. At the head of the room, Captain Gideon Hawkins stood impassively, his artificial gaze sweeping over the gathered candidates like a searchlight. He had shed his battle-scarred armor in favor of a surprisingly mundane uniform, yet he still radiated an aura of barely restrained lethality that set him apart from the other instructors flanking him. "Listen up, maggots," Hawkins barked, his voice cracking through the air like a whip. "You are here because you are the best of the best, the cream of the Terran Republic's fighting crop. You have been chosen to undertake the most challenging and rewarding training program in human history, to mold yourselves into the most lethal and effective warriors the galaxy has ever seen. But make no mistake," he continued, his augmetic eyes flashing, "this will be no walk in the park. The Hot Drop Regiment will test you in ways you cannot possibly imagine, will push you to the very brink of your physical and mental limits. Many of you will not make it through, and there is no shame in that. But for those of you who do," he paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "For those of you who earn the right to call yourselves Hot Drops, you will become part of a brotherhood forged in the crucible of combat, a band of elite warriors tasked with the most dangerous and crucial missions the Republic has to offer. You will become the tip of the spear, the first and last line of defense against the myriad threats that seek to destroy all we hold dear. The road ahead will be long and fraught with peril, but at the end of it, you will emerge as something more than human, as living incarnations of the indomitable will and warrior spirit that have driven our species to the stars. You will become angels of death, striking fear into the hearts of our enemies and bringing hope to the downtrodden and oppressed. So steel yourselves, candidates. Embrace the pain and the hardship, for they will be your constant companions in the weeks to come. And when the time comes to make the drop and bring the fight to the enemy, you will be ready. You will be Hot Drops." With those words, Hawkins stepped back, yielding the floor to the other instructors. Over the next several hours, Jax and his fellow candidates were bombarded with a dizzying array of information. The grueling physical regimen that would push their bodies to the absolute limit, the advanced tactics and technology they would need to master, the deadly environments and implacable foes they would face. It was enough to make even the most hardened soldier blanch, but Jax found himself exhilarated by the challenge, his heart pounding with anticipation. As the briefing finally wound to a close and the candidates began to file out of the room, Jax found himself approached by Captain Hawkins. The older man clapped a hand on Jax's shoulder, the servos in his augmetic fingers whirring softly. "I meant what I said, Reese," Hawkins rumbled, his artificial gaze boring into Jax's own. "The path ahead will be harder than anything you faced before. But I have a feeling about you, kid. You've got the spark, the fire in your belly that separates the true warriors from the chaff. Stick with it, no matter how tough it gets, and you'll come out the other side as one of the best of the best." Jax swallowed hard, feeling a sudden weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He knew that the captain's words were not idle praise, but a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down for him to prove his worth. And in that moment, he swore to himself that he would not falter, that he would push himself beyond all limits to earn his place among the legendary Hot Drops. "I won't let you down, sir," Jax said, his voice ringing with conviction. "I'll give everything I have and more. I won't stop until I'm wearing that black armor and dropping into the thick of the fight alongside the rest of the 181st. Hawkins nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I know you will, son. I know you will. Just remember, the only easy day was yesterday. From here on out, you're in for the ride of your life." With those words, the captain turned and strode away, leaving Jax to ponder the long and arduous road ahead. But even as a flicker of trepidation warmed its way into his gut, Jax could not suppress the surge of excitement and purpose that blazed through him like a wildfire. He had been given a chance to become something greater, to make a real difference in the unending battle against the darkness that threatened to consume all of human space. And no matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, Jack swore that he would seize that chance with both hands and never let go. He would become a hot drop, an angel of death, descending from on high to bring swift and righteous vengeance to humanity's foes. And the galaxy would tremble before him. Trial by fire. Private Jack Reese had thought he knew pain, had thought he understood the meaning of exhaustion. As a frontline soldier in the Terran Republic's never-ending war against the myriad threats that assailed humanity, he had endured hardships and horrors that would have broken lesser men. But nothing could have prepared him for the sheer, unrelenting agony of hot drop selection. Day after day, week after grueling week, Jax and his fellow candidates were pushed to the very limits of their physical and mental endurance. They were subjected to a brutal regimen of conditioning exercises designed to forge their bodies into lethal weapons, to hone their reflexes and strength to superhuman levels. They ran until their lungs screamed for air and their legs turned to jelly, lifted weights until their muscles quivered and their vision swam. They trained in the art of close-quarters combat, learning to wield their bodies as deadly instruments of war. But even as their physical capabilities were stretched to the breaking point, the candidates' minds were subjected to an equally relentless assault. They were drilled mercilessly in tactics and strategy, in the use of the cutting-edge weapons and technology that were the stock and trade of the hot drops. They were subjected to punishing psychological assessments designed to weed out those who lacked the mental fortitude to endure the stresses of life as an elite warrior. And through it all, Jax refused to yield. Even as his body screamed in protest and his mind reeled from the ceaseless barrage of challenges, he pushed himself ever harder, ever further. He would not falter, would not fail, not when so much was riding on his success. For Jax knew that the true test was yet to come. Weeks into the grueling selection process, the remaining candidates were at last deemed ready to face the final challenge. A brutal combat simulation designed to replicate the chaotic hell of a hot drop insertion behind enemy lines. As Jax stood in the ready room, his body encased in the sleek, matte black armor that was the hallmark of the hot drops, he felt a thrill of mingled anticipation and dread course through him. This was it, the moment of truth that would determine whether he had what it took to join the ranks of humanity's most elite warriors. The mission was simple in concept, if daunting in execution. The candidates would be dropped into a sprawling labyrinthine training complex, their objective to penetrate to the heart of the facility and retrieve a simulated data core containing vital enemy intelligence. To succeed, they would need to evade or eliminate the legions of robotic sentries and combat drones that roamed the complex, programmed to provide a punishing facsimile of the Krogan and other foes the hot drops regularly faced. But even as Jack steeled himself for the trials ahead, he knew that the true challenge would come not from without, but from within. In the crucible of combat, each candidate would be forced to confront their own limits, their own fears and weaknesses. Only those who could master themselves, who could push past the pain and the exhaustion and the gnawing fear, would emerge as true hot drops. As the call came to embark, Jax took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his armor settle about him like a second skin. He checked his weapons one final time: the sleek, deadly pulse rifle, the razor-sharp monomolecular combat knife, the satchel of breaching charges and other specialized gear. Then, with a nod to his fellow candidates, he strode towards the waiting dropship, his heart pounding with a fierce, unquenchable determination. He would not fail. He would not falter. He would emerge from this trial by fire as a true hot drop, a living weapon forged in the flames of adversity and tempered by the indomitable will of humanity. And he would bring the fight to the enemies of the Terran Republic with all the fury and skill of an avenging angel. The dropship shuddered as it passed through the atmospheric containment field and plunged into the void beyond. In the cramped, dimly lit confines of the drop bay, Jax and his fellow candidates checked their gear one final time, their faces grim and focused beneath the polarized faceplates of their helmets. Then, with a thunderous roar of thruster fire, the dropship decelerated hard, the sudden T-forces slamming the armored soldiers back in their crash couches. A series of resounding clangs echoed through the hull as the docking clamps engaged, anchoring the ship to the airlock of the training complex. 30 seconds to drop. The pilot's voice crackled over the comm. Stand by. Jax felt his heart hammering against his ribs, his breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. This was it. The moment of truth. The final test that would determine his fate, his very future. The drop light pulsed from red to amber. The boarding ramp shuddered and began to lower, the sudden influx of recycled air washing over the waiting soldiers like a cold, sterile wind. Jax's grip tightened on the stock of his pulse rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger guard. Beside him, the other candidates tensed, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. The light flashed green. The ramp slammed down. Go, 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 the squad leader roared. Move out. And with a thunderous roar of booted feet and thruster fire, the hot drop candidates surged down the ramp and into the waiting jaws of hell. The trial by fire had begun. Into the breach. The air burned in Private Jax Reese's lungs as he sprinted down the smoke-choked corridor, the staccato thunder of pulse rifle fire and the shrill whine of ricocheting rounds filling his ears. All around him, the training complex shuddered under the force of explosions and the impact of heavy ordnance, the deck plates bucking and heaving like the surface of a storm-tossed sea. It had all gone to hell with horrifying speed. No sooner had the hot drop candidates stormed out of their transport and into the labyrinthine depths of the complex than they had found themselves engulfed in a maelstrom of violence and chaos. The robotic defenders, fiendishly clever and equipped with lethally accurate facsimiles of Krogan pulse weapons, had anticipated their every move, springing a devastating series of ambushes that had scattered the candidates and picked them off one by one. Now, less than 15 minutes into the simulation, more than half of Jax's fellow aspirants were dead, their armor locked down, and their weapons deactivated by the computer's unforgiving judgment. Only a handful remained, grimly fighting their way deeper into the complex in a desperate bid to complete their objective and salvage a victory from the jaws of crushing defeat. Jax gritted his teeth as he vaulted over a shattered barricade and into a scorched and pitted atrium, his helmet's heads-up display flickering with threat markers and tactical data. Somewhere ahead, beyond the next set of blast doors, lay the simulated data core that was their target, and with it, the only hope of redemption for the battered and bloodied survivors. But standing between them and their goal was a veritable army of robotic defenders, heavily armed and utterly merciless. Even now, Jax could hear the heavy tread of their mechanical feet, the low, ominous hum of their power cells as they closed in for the kill. "This is Reese." He barked into his helmet's comm unit, his voice harsh and breathless. "I'm on the lower level, approaching the target. I need backup now." A burst of static crackled across the line, punctuated by the staccato chatter of pulse rifle fire. "Negative, Reese," came the reply, the voice of one of the few remaining candidates, a grizzled veteran named Hawkins. "We're pinned down on the upper level, taking heavy fire. You're on your own." Jax felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his gut, but he pushed it aside with ruthless determination. He was a hot drop, a warrior forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the indomitable will of humanity. He would not fail, not now, not when so much depended on his success. With a growl of defiance, Jax surged forward, his pulse rifle spitting death and destruction. He moved like a wraith, his augmented reflexes and strength propelling him forward with superhuman speed and agility. Robotic defenders fell before him, their armored carapaces shattering under the relentless barrage of his weapon, but always more rose to take their place, an unending tide of merciless steel and circuitry. Jax felt a searing pain lance through his shoulder as a pulse bolt found its mark, the force of the impact spinning him around and slamming him hard into a bulkhead. He gritted his teeth against the pain, fighting back the black spots that swam before his eyes. His armor systems shrieked warnings and damage reports, but he ignored them, forcing himself back to his feet with grim determination. He was close now, so close. Just one more set of blast doors, one more goblet of fire and death, and the data core would be his. He could see it, a pulsing column of light rising from a pedestal in the center of a vast, circular chamber, taunting him with its nearness. With a roar of defiance, Jax charged forward, his pulse rifle blazing. He ducked and weaved, his armor sparking and smoking as pulse bolts stitched the air around him. A robotic defender loomed before him, its massive fist swinging towards his head with bone-shattering force. But Jax was faster. He dropped to his knees, sliding beneath the blow and bringing his rifle up to pump a burst of fire into the machine's unprotected underside. The defender staggered and fell, its systems shorting out in a cascade of sparks and smoke. Jax was on his feet in an instant, sprinting for the data core with every ounce of speed and strength left in his battered body. He could hear the robotic defenders closing in behind him, their thunderous footsteps echoing through the chamber like the drumbeats of doom. But he was so close, so close. With a final, desperate lunge, Jax's hand closed around the data core, the device's cool, hard surface a blessed relief against his aching fingers. He wrenched it free from its pedestal, the chamber's lights flickering and dimming as the simulation registered his success. But even as triumph surged through his veins, Jax heard a shrill, urgent warning blare from his helmet's comm unit. He spun around, his eyes widening in horror as he saw the massive, hulking form of a robotic juggernaut lumbering towards him, its armored carapace bristling with weapons, and its glowing red eyes fixed on him with merciless intent. There was no time to think, no time to plan. With a wordless cry of defiance, Jax charged towards the juggernaut, his pulse rifle blazing. The machine's armor sparked and smoked under the onslaught, but it kept coming, its massive fists swinging with murderous force. Jax ducked and dodged, his heart pounding and his breath coming in ragged gasps. He fired until his rifle's power cell ran dry, then cast the weapon aside and drew his monomolecular blade, the razor-sharp edge glinting in the flickering light. The juggernaut loomed over him, its massive fist sweeping down towards his head. Jax twisted aside at the last moment, the blow slamming into the deck plates with enough force to send shards of metal flying. He lunged forward, his blade flashing as he buried it to the hilt in the machine's armored torso, seeking out vital circuitry and power conduits. The juggernaut convulsed, sparks and smoke pouring from its wound. But still it fought on, its other fist slamming into Jax's chest with bone-crushing force. He felt something give way inside him, a white-hot lance of agony searing through his body. But he gritted his teeth and pushed through the pain, wrenching his blade free and stabbing again and again, until at last the juggernaut shuddered and collapsed, its systems shorting out in a cascade of sparks and flames. Jax staggered back, his vision swimming and his breath coming in ragged gasps. He clutched the data core to his chest, the device feeling impossibly heavy in his aching hands. "This is Reese," he gasped into his helmet's comm unit, his voice a hoarse, pain-racked whisper. "Mission accomplished. I have the data core. Requesting immediate extraction." For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing but static on the line. Then, a voice crackled through the interference, harsh and triumphant. "Acknowledged, Reese," came the reply. The voice of Captain Hawkins, the grizzled veteran who had overseen the hot drop selection process. "Extraction is inbound. And congratulations, soldier, you just earned your wings." Jax felt a surge of pride and relief wash over him, momentarily eclipsing the pain of his wounds and the exhaustion that dragged at his limbs. He had done it. He had passed the final test, had proven himself worthy of the mantle of a hot drop warrior. But even as he savored his triumph, Jax knew that this was only the beginning. The real battles, the true tests of his mettle, still lay ahead, and he would face them with the same unyielding determination and indomitable will that had carried him through the crucible of hot drop selection. For he was a warrior of the Terran Republic, a living weapon forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the unbreakable spirit of humanity. And he would never rest, never falter, until the enemies of his people lay broken and defeated at his feet. No one left behind. Corporal Jax Reese's heart pounded in his ears as he sprinted down the blood-stained corridor of the Krogan high ship, the deck plates shuddering beneath his armored boots with each monstrous impact of the aliens' weapons against the vessel's battered hull. Alarm klaxons blared and emergency lights flashed, casting eerie, fitful shadows across the twisted biomechanical architecture that surrounded him. It had all gone wrong, so terribly wrong. The mission, a daring raid to sabotage the Hive ship's warp drive and cripple the Krogan's ability to launch lightning strikes deep into Terran space, had seemed like just another operation, just another chance for Jax and his fellow hot drops to prove their mettle against the Republic's most implacable foe. But the Krogan had been ready for them. Somehow, the aliens had anticipated the hot drops' intrusion, had laid a fiendish trap that had ensnared the elite warriors the moment they set foot upon the high ship. Robotic sentries and genetically engineered abominations had swarmed out of every shadowed alcove and chittering tunnel, their weapons spitting fire and death with merciless precision. Jax and his comrades had fought back with all the skill and fury at their command, their pulse rifles and monomolecular blades reaping a bloody toll among the Krogan forces. But the aliens kept coming, wave after shrieking wave, driven by a single overriding imperative: to rend and tear and kill, to drown the human interlopers in a tide of chitin and flashing claws. One by one, Jax had seen his squadmates fall, their armor rent and their bodies broken by the relentless onslaught. He had watched in horror as Sergeant Malik, the grizzled veteran who had taken Jax under his wing during those first, grueling days of hot drop training, had been dragged down by a horde of chittering drones, his screams of defiance and agony echoing through the comms even as his life signs flatlined. And then, in a final, horrific blow, Jax had seen Captain Hawkins, the legendary warrior who had forged the 181st Hot Drop Regiment into the scourge of the Krogan and the pride of the Terran Republic, fall, her armor shattered and her body broken by a massive, hissing monstrosity. Even in death, she had fought on, her monomolecular blade flashing as she hacked and slashed at the creature's armored hide until at last it crushed her beneath its bulk, her final, defiant roar of fury echoing through the Hive ship's twisting corridors. Now Jax was alone, the sole survivor of the ill-fated mission. His armor hung in tatters, his weapons spent, and his body battered and bleeding from a dozen wounds. But still he pressed on, driven by a single all-consuming thought. He had to finish the mission. He had to destroy the warp drive, to strike a blow against the Krogan that would make the sacrifices of his comrades mean something. He could not let their deaths be in vain. And so he ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps and his heart pounding in his ears, towards the pulsing, eldritch glow that marked the Hive ship's engineering deck. He could feel the deck plates shuddering beneath his feet, could hear the shrill, buzzing whine of the warp drive spinning up to full power. He was running out of time. But even as desperation clawed at his mind, Jax refused to give in to despair. He was a hot drop, a warrior forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the unbreakable will of humanity. He would not fail, not now, not when the fate of the Terran Republic hung in the balance. With a final, gasping effort, Jax burst through the bulkhead doors and onto the engineering deck, his eyes widening in horrified awe at the sight that greeted him. The warp drive loomed before him, a seething mass of eldritch energies and twisted alien technology that hurt the mind just to look upon. And swarming around it, their claws flashing and their mandibles chittering, was a horde of Krogan warriors, their compound eyes fixed upon the lone human with murderous intent. Jax didn't hesitate. With a roar of defiance and fury, he charged forward, his monomolecular blade flashing in his hand. He ducked and weaved, his armor sparking and his flesh sizzling as the Krogan weapons found their mark again and again. But he pressed on, hacking and slashing with all the strength and skill left in his battered body, the deck plates growing slick with alien ichor and his own blood. And then, with a final desperate lunge, Jax was through, his blade sinking to the hilt in the pulsing heart of the warp drive. The device shuddered and convulsed, eldritch energies cascading out of control and arcing through the chamber in searing bolts of lightning. Krogan warriors shrieked and burned, their carapaces melting and their flesh bubbling as the overloading drive consumed them. Jax staggered back, his vision swimming and his mind reeling from the howling energies that ripped at his thoughts. He could feel the high ship shuddering and bucking around him, could hear the shrill, rising keen of its structural integrity alarms. He had done it. The warp drive was destroyed, the mission complete. But even as triumph surged through his battered frame, Jax heard a shrill, urgent warning blare through his helmet's comm unit. He spun around, his eyes widening in horror as he saw the chittering tide of Krogan warriors surging towards him, their claws flashing, and their mandibles dripping with venomous ichor. There was no time to think, no time to plan. With a final, defiant roar, Jax charged towards the alien horde, his blade flashing in his hand. He would not go quietly into the night, would not let the Krogan claim one final victory. He would fight to his last breath, would make the aliens pay for every drop of human blood they had spilled. And then, just as the tide of chitin and claws was about to engulf him, Jax heard a new sound over the din of battle and the shriek of tortured metal, the deep, thunderous roar of hot drop engines. He looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw a battered, soot-stained transport smashing through the weakened hull of the engineering deck, its weapons blazing as it carved a path through the Krogan horde. The transport shuddered to a halt before Jax, its boarding ramp slamming down to reveal a squad of hot drop troopers, their armor blackened and their weapons spitting fire. At their head stood a familiar figure, his face grim and his eyes blazing with the same unquenchable fury that burned in Jax's own heart. "Reese," the figure roared, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Get your ass on board, now. We're getting the hell out of here." Jax didn't hesitate. With a final, gasping effort, he hurled himself up the boarding ramp and into the waiting arms of his comrades. The ramp slammed shut behind him, the transport's engines roaring as it blasted free of the disintegrating high ship and out into the starry void beyond. As the Krogan vessel exploded behind them, consumed by the uncontrollable energies of its own sabotaged warp drive, Jax collapsed against the bulkhead, his breath coming in ragged gasps and his vision swimming with exhaustion and blood loss. He could feel hands on him, could hear the urgent chatter of medics as they worked to stabilize his battered body. But even as consciousness slipped away from him, Jax felt a grim, unshakable pride swell within his chest. He had done it. Against all odds, against all hope, he had completed the mission and struck a blow against the Krogan that would be felt across the stars. And he had not done it alone. Even in his darkest hour, even when all had seemed lost, his fellow hot drops had come for him. They had risked everything to bring him home, to ensure that no warrior, no brother or sister was left behind. For that was the true strength of the hot drops, the unbreakable bond that held them together through the very fires of hell. They were more than just elite soldiers, more than just living weapons forged in the crucible of war. They were a family, bound by blood and sacrifice, by the unshakable knowledge that they would always stand together, always fight for each other, no matter the odds or the cost. And as Jax looked into the waiting embrace of unconsciousness, he knew that he would always be a part of that family, always be a hot drop, for now and forever, unto the very end of all things.